My name is Nicole Mashburn, and today we're going to talk about fertilization, conception, and implantation. Hang on just a second. Come on. There we go. Nope. Yeah. Okay, good. Got my pen. Sorry about that. Okay. So first, before we talk about this, let's get some terms. Pregnancy versus gestation. We've all heard of someone that's pregnant, right? We may have not have heard somebody that's gestating. We don't tend to use that term. Pregnancy is the events from fertilization until the time the infant is actually born. Gestation is a little bit longer period of time. It's the time from the last menstrual period until birth. So remember, you have your menstrual period, and then 2 weeks later you should ovulate. That's when you would get pregnant, and then, of course, the baby would be born. So gestation is a little bit longer period of time than pregnancy. So you may hear those words, but they are a little different. They don't mean exactly the same thing. Also, some terms that we use to describe the baby in utero, inside the uterus. All right, fertilization. Once you have fertilization where the sperm and the egg come together, you have what's called the conceptus. And the conceptus is actually the developing offspring. So once you have fertilization occur all the way through birth, you have the conceptus. The embryo is basically from the conceptus of fertilization through week 8. So from fertilization through about week 8 is an embryo. And I always tell my students, if you're looking at the pictures, it still looks kind of like a strange little creature. It doesn't quite look like a little human yet. Has a large head, kind of looks like if you looked at a fetal, an embryonic chicken or pig, anything. You see kind of an outline of a shape. You're not really sure what it is. About the time it looks like a baby, from 9 weeks on, that's when we call it a fetus. So it really starts to have those arms and legs and fingers and toes and nose. You can really see that it looks like a baby. From 9 weeks on through birth, we call it a fetus. So you'll see the words conceptus, embryo, and fetus, and they mean different things. Again, the embryo is from fertilization through 8 weeks. A fetus is 9 weeks through birth. And then once it's born, we use the word infant. All right, what is fertilization? Fertilization occurs when the sperm and the secondary oocyte, you may call it an egg, come together. So the chromosomes, you have to mix those chromosomes together. You've got to bring the mom, the genetic information from the mom, the genetic information from the dad, put them together. That's fertilization. And when you fertilize that egg, we then call it a zygote. Okay? There's a very small window of opportunity for this to actually occur. Oocytes are only viable alive or able to be fertilized for about 12 to 24 hours once they're released from the ovary. So about 12 to 24 hours is your window for the oocyte. Sperm, they're viable or alive for 24 to 48 hours after ejaculation. So you've got a little small window for that sperm and egg to come together. So for fertilization to occur, coitus, sex, or intercourse, must take place either 2 days before ovulation or up to 24 hours after. So if you're in that part of your life where you're trying to get pregnant, they'll usually tell you there's about a 4 to 5 day window around which you should have sex. Because you don't exactly know when you're ovulating, you can kind of make a really good guess. So if you know you're going to ovulate on Tuesday, that's your good guess, then usually you'll go, 2 days before, 2 days after with sex to try to get pregnant. Because you've got about 12 hours you can actually have that vaginal combination occur, but you usually try for 4 or 5 days. So it's amazing that it ever occurs at all, because it is actually a very small window. Okay, so what happens? Here's our female reproductive system. Have the vagina opening to the outside. You have the cervix. The cervix is basically the neck of the uterus. Here's your uterus here. You guys have, I'm assuming, studied female reproductive anatomy. Your fallopian tubes or uterine tubes. Here's your ovaries. There's one over here, one over here. And basically, during coitus, the sperm is deposited inside the vagina. And there's thick cervical mucus. So there's actually like a little plug there sometimes in the month. Sometimes that will thin and fall out, or yeah, I guess fall out's a good word. So basically the sperm can swim up into the uterus. They swim up into the uterus, and then some will go left, some will go right into the different fallopian tubes. And if an egg has been ovulated or released, it will be inside the uterine tubes or fallopian tubes, and maybe you'll get fertilization. Now, all the sperm don't make it up there. There's a lot of sperm that are deposited in the vagina, but they all don't make it. Some make it through, some basically come back out, drain out, and some get lost. This little area around the cervix is called the fornix. It doesn't go anywhere. So sometimes the sperm, they lose their way, and they don't even make it up to the right spot. That's why it takes so many. Why does it take so many sperm? Right after coitus, right after sex, millions leave the vagina. They just leak right back out. Inside the vagina, it has a very acidic or low pH that will destroy the sperm. So they're basically killed by the acidic environment of the vagina. That cervical plug, depending on what time of the month it is, there may be such thick cervical mucus that they can't even make it through the cervix, or maybe they got lost. They went into the fornix instead of up into the cervix. Inside the uterus, you have some phagocytic leukocytes. Phagocytic leukocytes. What does that sound like? Yeah, basically white blood cells that eat stuff, so part of your immune system, basically. So they're going to get rid of foreign bodies, and they consider the sperm a foreign body. And then after all those millions, you have a few thousand will actually reach both uterine tubes. And remember, some go left, some go right. So only one side should be releasing an egg per month. So if the egg's on this side, then all these have a shot at getting to the egg. So it takes a lot just because of the loss of sperm along the journey from the vagina up to the fallopian tube. Okay, so if a sperm or a bunch of sperm make it to the oocyte, what happens? So here's our secondary oocyte. Okay, here's our sperm. Still thousands of sperm. And they're basically, there's even some research that maybe even says that these sperm actually have like precursors to olfactory sensors, like they actually can smell out the egg. I've read that sometimes, and I've read that it's not true. So, but the latest I read said they actually think they can smell out the egg. So the sperm swim, they find the egg, and they approach the egg. Now, only one sperm is allowed to enter. Okay, we don't want what's called polyspermy to occur. You don't want more genetic material than that can be viable. When you have the male and female DNA come together, if you remember anything about genetics, you remember that we have the male sperm has 23 chromosomes, the female has 23. You put those together and you get a full set of 46 chromosomes. So if you had more than one sperm, you would have more than 23, and it would be more than 46 total, and it wouldn't work. It's just not viable. So only one sperm can enter into the secondary oocyte. So basically the sperm swims up, and it will attach to these little sperm receptors. Okay, so here we go. The sperm weaves its way past the zona granulosa cells of the corona radiata, which you learned about in reproduction. This sperm will bind, and when it does, the head of the sperm has the acrosomal area, or this little acrosomal region, and it actually contains enzymes. And this is why it takes so many. Millions of these sperm, or thousands of these sperm, will bind, and the little heads will basically burst open and spill out enzymes. And millions of these little enzymes will basically help to open up or make a place to penetrate, for the sperm to penetrate through this area here, so the sperm can actually enter into the cell. So it takes a lot of sperm, a lot of enzymes from all these little sperm heads to do this job. Eventually one's going to make it through. Sperm's going to bind, and it's going to make it through. When it comes through, basically the nucleus is spit out, comes off, and the little body and tail stay behind. So your sperm nucleus is basically what word do they use? Sperm contents, there you go. Sperm contents enter the oocyte. So we call that the sperm nucleus, enters the oocyte. Now once that happens, this entry of the sperm contents actually causes a chemical change. You see a rise in calcium. You've probably heard of calcium before. Back in 201, we talked about calcium when we talked about muscle contraction and nervous conduction. Calcium levels rise inside the oocyte cytoplasm, and that actually triggers a reaction. And that reaction is basically a hardening of the zona pellucida. So this is the zona pellucida, and it actually just becomes hard, and no more sperm can get through. So once that one sperm makes it through, nobody else gets through, and that blocks polyspermy. And I tried to find the clip. I wanted to embed it, and I just couldn't find it. But maybe if you Google it or YouTube it, you might find it. There was actually a video of a sperm entering an egg, and they used some kind of nuclear signal, something that glowed, basically. And you could, I guess it was calcium that had been bound with some kind of radioisotope. Anyway, so when the video showed that cell, that oocyte actually hardening. You could actually see this spreading wave around the cell and actually see it harden. I'm going to keep looking for it, but if anybody sees it, let me know. It's a really cool video that I saw one time on Scientific America and can't find it again. But anyway, so once that goes through, no more sperm come through, and you have the sperm nucleus inside the egg. Moving on. Okay, so what else happens? All right, so now we've got the sperm penetration of the secondary oocyte. Now, if you remember, the secondary oocyte, it's just been kind of hanging out. It's already gone through meiosis 1, or meiosis 1, and now it's going to complete meiosis 2. Okay? So it goes through meiosis 2 and forms the ovum, and you get those polar bodies, which hopefully you remember from studying mitosis and meiosis. You remember meiosis 1 occurs to split the chromosomes so that you have half the number of chromosomes in the ovum. The sperm and ovum nuclei then come together, they approach each other, and they fuse. Now when this fusion of these two male and female DNA, okay, these two nuclei come together, that's called fertilization. And now we have a zygote. So you had your sperm nucleus, your oocyte, completes meiosis 2, the two DNAs, two nuclei basically come together, the DNA comes together, actually called pronuclei at this point, come together, they fuse, you get fertilization and the formation of a zygote. Okay, so let's put this in perspective. Where is all this actually occurring? So here's our uterus again, so the sperm swam up, came this way, and here was our, had our egg, had the ovulation, had our secondary oocyte. Here come the sperm. They joined with the oocyte. Fertilization was accomplished. Now there's little cilia basically inside the fallopian tube, and they're sweeping this fertilized embryo, or zygote at this point, down the fallopian tube and toward the uterus. Within the first 2 days, you get what's called cleavage. Once this zygote is formed, you get what's called cleavage. Let me write that down, cleavage. And cleavage basically means you're getting division, but size isn't changing. So you're seeing things, you're seeing division happen, like that little division sign, but no change in size. What do I mean by that? All right, let's just in size. So let's look at that. So you had your zygote, you had your first cleavage, and basically you had division. And so in here you had basically two parts of the same size, two cells. All right, so now you're going to split it again, and you're going to have 4 cells. But you see the overall size is not changing, it's just cleaving. The cells getting more cells, but no change in size. By 3 days, you have what's called the morula, and it's just a solid ball of cells. The whole overall size is the same, but you have hundreds, about 100 of these really small cells. Now at the morula stage, these cells are what we call totipotent. Okay, and that just basically means they can become anything. So think about stem cells. Any one of these cells can become anything in the body. They're not programmed yet. They're able to become anything at this point. The next video you see, we'll be talking about the actual development, talking about the different germ layers and what becomes what. But at this point, Every cell can become something. They're not programmed, they're totipotent. They're still floating down the fallopian tubes, and at about, let's see, 7 days, you get implantation. It actually implants inside the uterus. Now when it implants, it's called a blastocyst. And the blastocyst is basically a round group of cells, has a cavity, fluid-filled cavity, and it has this inner cell mass. This whole thing, you have the trophoblast, this inner cell blastocyst cavity, and this inner cell mass. And this is the blastocyst, and that's what actually implants at about a week after fertilization. Now what happens? Implantation. Okay, so 6 or 7 days after ovulation, you've had fertilization. The zygote has come down the fallopian tubes to the uterus. Basically, this blastocyst will implant in the endometrial cells of the uterus. And I've got a picture of that. I've got 2 pictures to show you. Here's the blastocyst, your trophoblast, your inner cell mass, your blastocyst cavity, and here is the endometrium. Okay, and basically it's going to implant inside there. This endometrium is just going to come around like that. See? And so it's going to become part of the endometrium of the uterus. Pretty cool. So this little cell, this little area here, this is our future embryo. Okay, so this inner cell mass is what's going to become the baby. It's got all the cells that you need to be programmed to then become the baby, the embryo. Okay, now while all that's happening, we've got some hormones that are going on. And this one is called HCG, or human chorionic gonadotropin. And this is the one that you see, this is the one that they test you for in a pregnancy test. So when you go and they have you urinate on a stick and you look for the little plus or minus like an EPT test, you're testing for HCG. That's the test that they test you for during pregnancy. Now, it is secreted by the trophoblast and then later by the chorion, hence the name human chorionic gonadotropin. So here's ovulation, okay? You start getting it secreted by the trophoblast, okay? Then you're going to start having the chorion will secrete it. And then eventually it's going to be secreted, the secretion is going to decline. Because what is it doing? What is human chorionic gonadotropin doing? It's promoting, remember that corpus luteum way back when you talked about the menstrual cycle, the corpus luteum? It's basically telling the corpus luteum, hey, we're about to have a baby. We need this uterus to be thick. We need to have a lot of blood vessels. We need it to be ready to carry a baby. And so it's telling the corpus luteum, keep making that progesterone and estrogens. We need them. So it's basically stimulating the corpus luteum to make progesterone and estrogen. So you can see the progesterone and estrogens are continually being made. Now it's going to do its job until the placenta takes over. So somewhere around the 2nd month, so around 8 weeks, okay, 2nd month, HCG starts to fall, and progesterone and estrogen are being made by the placenta. And the placenta is basically what connects the mother to the baby. Now, we're going to talk about the umbilical cord, but the placenta is actually a connection between the mother and baby that we'll talk about here in just a minute. So you have HCG. It's going to keep that estrogen and progesterone being made by the corpus luteum. You're going to have the placenta being formed, and once it forms, it'll take over and make the progesterone and estrogens itself. So those are some of your hormonal changes that are going on. Okay, so placentation. This is basically making the placenta. Here is 7.5 days of implanting. You can see it's totally inside the endometrium now. 12 days, 16 days. So at 16 days, we're calling it an embryo now. You can see, let's see, here's the yolk sac. This yellow is the yolk sac here and here and here. Looking for some words that maybe you recognize. Amnion, you've heard of amniotic fluid? you can start to see the amnion. This cavity that holds the amniotic fluid is starting to show up. The chorion and the chorionic villus. These are basically are going to become like little blood vessels. So you've got the mother endometrium, these maternal blood vessels here and here and here and here, and you're going to see this chorionic villi are going to be starting to go up into and be associated with these maternal blood vessels so that you can have exchange of oxygen, carbon dioxide, things like that between the baby and the mother. So you're forming the placenta. So as the blastocyst is implanting, you're getting blood vessels from the baby, you're getting blood vessels from the mother, and they're starting to come in close contact together, and you're forming that placenta. So that takes me to the placenta is made from both the mother and the baby. You have embryonic trophoblast tissue that makes part of the placenta, and maternal endometrial tissue makes part of the placenta. As it's developing, you get what's called the chorion with these little finger-like villi. Basically, they're little blood vessels. They're going to make little finger-like capillaries almost that basically will be associated with the maternal blood supply so that you can get that exchange. These this chorion will basically extend to the embryo, and you'll get the umbilical cord. So let me draw the picture. I'm a bad artist, but let me see if I can give it a shot. So here's my baby. Okay, here's the umbilical cord. Here's the little finger-like villi. Here's the uterus. I think I've got a picture of this. Why am I drawing it? Who knows? So you have exchange of oxygen, carbon dioxide, not monoxide, here with the placenta going into the umbilical area. I bet you have a picture of that. Hang on. Yeah, how about that? Let me not draw that. I'll go back. But anyway, here's your baby. Here's your umbilical cord. Okay, and here is the placenta. Okay, this whole area is the placenta. And you can see this intermeshing of the vessels from the baby and the vessels from the mom so that you can get exchange. That's a much better picture than me drawing it. Okay. Sorry about that. So let's talk about the placenta. It's fully formed and functional. Fully formed and functional by the end of the 3rd month. And when I mean functional, it's doing a lot of things. It's basically doing everything for the baby. The placenta is doing everything for the baby because the baby can't really breathe or get their nutrition, anything like that. So the placenta is acting as the respiratory system, okay, for exchange of gas. It's bringing in nutrition, okay, so when mama's eating a big milkshake, okay, and all that sugar and all those proteins, all that fat, so getting the nutrition to bring to the baby. Excretion, any kind of waste products, like taking away carbon dioxide. Sometimes it takes away waste products. Sometimes the waste products, like urine from the baby, just go inside the amniotic sac. But there's some excretion going on. And remember, the placenta is also making hormones. So it's got an endocrine function. So it's fully functioning. It's doing all its jobs by 3 months. Let's go with that endocrine again. It's making several other hormones besides that of progesterone and estrogen. It's making lactate. So that has something to do with milk production. Thyrotropin, kind of sounds like thyroid, has to do with metabolism. You don't have to know this stuff in detail. I'm just kind of give you some hints what it means. So lactogen has to do with milk production, thyrotropin with metabolism, and then relaxin, and that has to do something later on with birth. Okay, now remember I said HCG was something important that we measure in pregnancy. If HCG levels fall, okay, if things aren't working right, the pregnancy will abort. Okay, because if you don't have that estrogen and progesterone keeping the uterus nice and vascularized and thick and ready to carry the child full term, when those HCG levels fall, if the placenta doesn't take over, it doesn't do its job, it doesn't make its hormones, then the baby will abort. And a lot of times, let's go back to that chart. Hang on. A lot of times people will miscarry somewhere between 8 and 12 weeks, right around that 8 to 12 weeks, when that placenta is supposed to be taking over, making the progesterone estrogen. If this doesn't happen, if that changeover doesn't happen, then that's usually when people miscarry. So that's why you kind of, when you get past maybe 9, 10, 11 weeks, when you get to that 12th week, you're pretty safe, okay? That's usually not going to happen. So this is kind of a critical time that women try to get through to not miscarry, hoping that placenta starts to do its job. Okay, what else? When we talked about that blood, the mixing of the placenta where the chorionic villi come together and you get the exchange, the blood doesn't actually touch. Maternal and embryo blood doesn't normally mix. There's actual barrier there, little capillary, little villi that keep the blood from actually mixing. It's a real thin layer between the two, but the blood doesn't actually come into contact with each other. So here's another picture showing as this is developing. Here's your yolk sac, here's your umbilical cord, umbilical artery and vein going into the chorionic villus, these little finger-like projections. This whole thing is the placenta. You have the maternal blood coming in and basically filling these little spaces. So the villi and these spaces, they come together for exchange. You have your amnion, which is basically the sac containing the amniotic fluid. And that's about all I want to say about that. And you can see as the baby gets bigger, the placenta basically usually winds up being on the kind of the superior side of the uterus, and the baby usually comes below. Now sometimes, if something goes wrong, sometimes the placenta will form on the inferior side of the uterus, blocking the way of the exit of the baby, and that's not a good thing. If that happens, then they're going to have a C-section, okay, because the baby can't get through. The placenta has basically blocked the way. So, you know, you're hoping typically the placenta should be somewhere on the superior side of the uterus so that there's free access for the baby to exit at the time of birth. All right, there's 4 other membranes that we'll talk about. Just again, I touched on them briefly, but let's just go back over it. The amnion, that's basically a membrane filled with amniotic fluid. Why do we have the amniotic fluid? It's buoyant, so the baby's in there kind of in a nice cushy place, you know, nice buoyant environment. It helps maintain a constant homeostatic temperature. That water in there gets to the mother's temperature, or the amniotic fluid stays at mom's temperature, so the baby stays at the right temperature, because remember, they're not really generating their own heat quite yet. They got to depend on mom to do that. The amniotic fluid comes from maternal blood, and as the child gets older, as the fetus grows and their kidneys start to function, they start to make urine. A lot of the amniotic fluid is actually made from fetal urine. It's okay, don't worry, don't freak out. It's still sterile, so it's all good. All right, you have the yolk sac. When you talk in the next video about the different layers, the germ layers like the mesoderm, endoderm, and ectoderm, the yolk sac actually will become part of the digestive system. It makes some of the first blood cells and some of the first blood vessels and some of our first germ cells. And like I said, you'll see a little bit more of that in the next video. You have the allantoid, and it's at the caudal end or the tail end of the yolk sac. It becomes the base for the umbilical cord and later part of the urinary bladder. And last but not least, the chorion helps form the placenta, and that's all those little blood vessels, okay? And it encloses the embryonic body and all these other membranes, so it's kind of the outermost layers, the chorion. Okay, so your next video, you're going to hear about how actually the baby develops. Okay, all these different layers, what they become as the fertilized egg then becomes an embryo and then a fetus, and the development that goes along with that. And then you'll have another video on how the child is actually born. We'll talk about birth, and that will be that. If you have any questions, let me know. I'm Dr. Mashburn, and if not, ask your instructor, and I will see you later. Thanks a lot.